The last detail. There's a killer on the streets. As I walk down the cobblestone alleys, I can feel the heightened tension permeating through the air. Everyone I come across has a look of caution on their faces. Everyone seems to be mindful of their surroundings more than usual, as they should. The city is abuzz with the latest gossip. The paper boys are already on the corners, shouting the latest headlines. I throw the boy a dime and read the headline. Slasher strikes again. 5th victim found. Manhunt continues. It says it was another young lady of the evening. Found her over on Archer Street. Unrecognizable, the paper says. Shame. Quite the pity when they go young like that. It says there's no leads, and that the madman is still on the loose. Will he be caught in time before he strikes again? Huh! Madman indeed. What do they know? They haven't a clue of what it takes to pull off something as complicated as murder, let alone 5 of them. The planning, the preparation it takes to pull off such a ghoulish act, the picking of the right victim, the location, every last little detail has to be planned out to perfection. I assure you, no person mad or out of their minds could pull off such a masterpiece of the macabre such as this. Some respect should be paid, not belittled with such insolent mockery. And will he be caught before he strikes again? What nonsense. Totally absurd. The police have no trace of me. Like I said, every last detail is accounted for. As a matter of fact, I'll pick my next victim on my way home. No. Too tall. Can't take the risk. No. Wrong hair color. What about her? No. Looks too important. That just won't do. Ah, yes. There she is. Perfect. The baker's assistant. She will do just fine. Now off to home and plan this fiendish crime. Ah, Mrs. Blankenship, good afternoon. Hello, sir. Here's your drink. Let me take your hat and coat. Dr. Rush? Yes. What seems to be the matter, Mrs. Blankenship? 2 detectives are waiting for you in your study, sir. They say that they have some questions for you. Oh, my. Well, thank you, Mrs. Blankenship. That will be all. Good afternoon, officers. How may I be of assistance? Ah, Dr. Rush. Good afternoon. We just have a couple of questions. Have you heard about the killings? Why, yes, of course. It's in all the newspapers. Do you have an alibi for last evening, sir? I was home working in my study. Why do you ask? Can any of your servants testify to that, Dr. Rush? No, I gave everyone the night off last night. Why am I being asked these questions, gentlemen? Well, Dr. Rush, this was found at the scene, this gold-embroidered handkerchief with the initials Dr. R.R. I believe that stands for Dr. Ryan Rush. Correct? Excuse me, Doctor. That is correct, isn't it? Every last detail. You have to go over every last detail. Every last detail. I plan every last detail. What's he saying? Every last detail. My God, he's mad. The DeLapore Toy Store. The DeLapore Toy Store was a place of family, fun, and entertainment. A lot of people have very fond memories of the place. But what people tend to forget are the people who went missing and the unknown tragedy that happened. No, this was not a Five Nights at Freddy's-like incident, but something a bit more demented. It all started in 1986 when three taxidermist brothers, Michael, Martin, and Marcus DeLapore, opened a vintage toy store. They sold personally made toys and trinkets of all kinds. Their store was very successful, and over time, they developed into a small business. Marcus left to visit some old castle ruins in England. At that time, Tanya DeLapore, their sister, joined the business. Then, when Marcus returned, a janitor went missing, and then a clerk, and then another janitor, then 2 security guards. Then all of a sudden, Marcus went into seclusion, and Martin and Michael went to see what was wrong with their brother, and went missing. 2 former soldiers, now cops, went to investigate the home of Marcus DeLapore, and what they found drove them insane. On one side of the room was a taxidermied Michael DeLapore, a wide, bloody grin sewn into his face, and eyes replaced with porcelain ones. On the other side of the room was a pile of limbs, and at the center of the room was a half-naked Marcus DeLapore, ravenously eating from a pile of entrails like an animal, speaking some language that the cops couldn't understand, like some proto-Italic language, like caveman talk mixed with Latin. The officers drew their guns and fatally shot Marcus DeLapore. 10 years later, Tanya would visit the house and retrieve several items Marcus had made before his death. Tanya would later take her life. Her successor, her son Jason, would also take his life. I'm a serial killer. The title says it all, really. I'm a murderer. I'm on 23 kills now, and it's becoming more frequent. My first was at 15, when some asshole claimed I fouled him in football, and I was kicked out of the game. I slit his throat that very night in his own bed. I was never caught, and it was a huge thing in our little town for years. I honestly thought nothing of it. No remorse, no fear of what I'd done. I was just a little surprised I actually went through with it. I wasn't even that angry at him, but I still decided he deserved it. Perhaps I was just looking for an excuse to kill. My next was at 20, when my neighbor refused to return my hammer I'd let him borrow. This time, I used that very hammer to cave his skull in after I found it in his unlocked shed. Again, I wasn't caught, although I was questioned, but I put up such a good act of shocked fear and sadness that I was able to walk free after an hour. That night, I sat in my chair and thought about how I'd killed 2 people and felt no remorse, only pleasure. I made the decision in that moment that I was going to travel the country, maybe even the world, to find new victims. My killing became less random over time. I started stalking my prey. They were still total strangers, and unlike my first 2 victims, they had done nothing against me. They were just unlucky enough to be chosen. I usually follow them for about a week before I can no longer resist the urge. In fact, I've been watching you for a few days now, and I think tonight Maybe the night I make 24 kills. Too early, too late. Standing on the curb outside my friend's house, the sky darkening, I weigh my options. This is what I get for leaving the house on time and actually looking up the train schedule. Me reaching the address of the party over 30 minutes early. I'd expected the walk from the station to suck up more time, especially with a 6-pack of beer under my arm. Maybe I could just knock on the door and try my luck, offer to help get things set up. Fashionably early has to be a thing, right? Then again, if they're still getting ready when I show up, I'm gonna look like a jerk. Imagine how mortifying it would be if I had to wait for her to get ready, or heaven forbid, got sent away to come back later. I'm a stickler for etiquette. Gritting my teeth, I turn away from the driveway, walking back into the night to kill time. Even despite the safe suburban environment around me, I can't shake a feeling of discomfort that trails me, like someone menacing is watching me. It feels wrong to be walking around in an unfamiliar place at night without a destination, every lap making my presence more known, all the while alternating a pack of beer between my aching arms. If there was ever a reason to drive places, this would be it. After pacing up, across, and down the cul-de-sac numerous times, I indulge myself in another glance at my wristwatch. 7:57 p.m. At last, it's almost time. Relieved to be able to finally enter the damn party, I trudge my way back to the house for the final time. I turn down the driveway of the house, readying myself to finally ring the doorbell, when an unseen figure leaps out from behind a car, their arms encasing my head in a vice grip. I struggle in vain to release them. Split seconds before, my neck is broken by my assailant. My case of beer clutters to the ground, not spilling a drop. Having successfully subdued my target, I unwrap my arms from their throat. Ensuring no one saw me, I proceed to drag the body underneath a nearby parked car. With that, I retrieve their abandoned case of beer. That's what this was all about, after all. I felt a pang of guilt looking down at this unknown mutual friend's corpse. If things had been different, we might have gotten along at this party. Oh well. I walk up the steps to the house and ring the doorbell. My friends greet me and compliment the 6-pack of beer I'm holding, unaware that another guest is lying dead in the street. I know killing a stranger for some drinks is severe, but I had extenuating circumstances. All the nearby bottle shops were closed, and I couldn't arrive empty-handed. I'm a stickler for etiquette. It looks like someone you know. You should be more concerned about what I can do, Freddie, Alice says, and less about what I can justify. Margaret awakens, batting her eyes as she looks around, confused. She remains still, pressing herself against the upholstered cushion of the car's passenger seat. Pine trees whip past the windows as the sun peeks out above them, but she can't tell if it's dawn or dusk. She feels the pain on the side of her head. Reaching up, she finds a raised knot there beneath her skin. It's warm, and it stings when she touches it. That's what I told your father, that son of a bitch, Alice says. Her voice drips with malice, so acidic it burns holes in the upholstery. Always putting me down, always making me feel like I'd done something wrong whenever I didn't do what he liked. Well, this time, I did something he really didn't like. Didn't I, Freddie? Mom, where are we going? Margaret says. Placing one hand on the wheel, Alice turns to look at the corpse behind her. It's buckled in and sitting upright in the middle of the rear seat. Its mouth hangs open with its glazed, unclosing eyes locked into an expression of shock. Mom, look out! Alice turns back around and sees a bowling ball-sized rock roll out from the tree line and into the path of her speeding car. She has no time to react. Sometime later, Margaret opens her eyes once more, batting them in a daze. Her head throbs as a pulsing, shooting pain that runs down her neck. Something warm and wet trickles down her forehead. She sees that the dashboard in front of her now has a small crack in the middle of it. She tries to look behind her, but mind-blowing pain engulfs her neck when she turns her head. She cries out in agony. The car rests on the side of the road, facing the trees. A thin plume of smoke wafts out from under the hood. Margaret smells the acrid scent of burned rubber in the air. Moving only her eyes, she sees that the driver's seat is empty. Alice limps into view around the front of the car, muttering curses under her breath. She observes the driver's side wheel well with a look of vexation. A loud snapping sound comes from somewhere behind the car. Alice looks up in the direction of the noise. Margaret watches as her expression morphs from one of annoyance to horrified surprise. What is it, Mom? She says. Alice rushes over to the driver's side door and opens it. Then she leans into the car and opens the glove box, revealing a handgun inside. Margaret recoils at the sight of the firearm as if it were a poisonous snake. What the hell, Mom? Why do you have a gun? Alice grabs the weapon and pulls it out. As she does, she glances into the back seat and freezes, staring for several moments. Then she looks through the rear window behind the car. Her eyes dart back and forth as her body begins to tremble. No, she says. It's impossible. She pulls the trigger by accident. The gun discharges with a loud pop, and Margaret shrieks as a bullet grazes her leg. Mom, what are you doing? Please stop, she says, screeching. Tears run down her cheeks as she sobs. I want to go home. She watches, sniffling as Alice stands up out of the car and points the gun in the direction behind it. I don't know how you're doing this, Freddie, Alice says, but I killed you before, and I'll kill you again. The gunshots sound like firecrackers going off. Margaret screams and ducks down, squeezing her eyes shut as she covers her head. Pain shoots down her neck, but she ignores it out of sheer terror. A moment later, she hears the sound of footsteps running away from the car. Silence fills the air. Margaret remains doubled over in the leg space in front of the passenger seat, breathing heavily. Soon, she hears a tapping sound on the passenger side window beside her. She attempts to turn her head to look, but pain again shoots down the side of her neck. Grimacing, she lets out a low moan, then turns her torso to face the window. She sees Alice standing there, with her hand upon the glass. She has a weird, "I know something you don't know" grin on her face. She taps once more as Margaret stares at her, dumbfounded. "Mom, what happened? Are you okay?" Alice continues smiling and tapping on the glass. Her taps grow louder, harder, more insistent. Margaret finds herself feeling strangely weaker and lightheaded, almost as if she's falling asleep. Then she blacks out. Gravel grinds beneath Francine's black boots as she circles the car, smoking a cigarette. A strong, cool breeze whooshes through the pine trees beneath an overcast sky, tussling her shoulder-length, reddish-brown hair. She wears a brown trench coat over a black business suit, with a detective's badge hanging from a chain around her neck. She sees the driver's side wheel stuck out at an odd angle. Leaning down, she perceives that the axle is bent inside the wheel well. A large rock, the apparent culprit, is jammed against the axle. Long curved skid marks lead from one of the lanes to where the car now rests on the side of the road. A gun lies on the ground next to the driver's door. Looking through the windows, Francine sees the body of a man in the back seat, wearing a dark suit. 3 bullet holes perforate his face. His eyes resemble milky white marbles. The car key is still in the ignition, attached to a keychain with several other keys hanging from it. In the front passenger seat, Francine sees what appears to be a large pile of ash. She puts her face up to the window to look at it more closely. "Detective Monroe?" says a voice behind her. She turns and sees a man in a state trooper uniform walking towards her. His patrol car sits on the side of the road, 10 meters behind him. "That's me," she says, flicking her cigarette butt away as she turns to face him. "You're the one who called this in, I presume?" The trooper nods as he approaches. "Trooper James Magnuson," he says, shaking her hand. "I was patrolling the area when I came across this vehicle. Thinking there had been an accident, I stopped and got out to provide assistance. As I came closer, I saw a subject in the back. After calling out several times, I could see that the person wasn't moving. When I looked inside, I saw the gunshot wounds in his face. Based on his general appearance, it was obvious that he'd been dead for a while, more than a day, at least." James looks back and forth, up and down the road. "My guess is that the killer, or killers, came out here to bury their dead buddy, somewhere deep in the woods. But they had a little car trouble before they could find the perfect spot. Then they panicked and took off on foot instead of finishing the job." He scoffs and shakes his head. "Amateurs." He continues, "The car is registered to Federico Gomez. Mr. Gomez is listed in our database as having been missing for 3 days, along with his wife and daughter Alice Gomez and Margaret Gomez. The body matches his description, but I looked around the area and saw no immediate sign of the others. The fact that someone shot him in the face a few times tells me this wasn't just business, it was personal." "What about that big pile of ash in the front seat?" Francine says. "What do you make of that?" James shrugs, glancing at the car. "I thought that maybe you could tell me. Hopefully it's not human remains." Francine says, finishing his sentence. James nods as a shoulder-mounted radio chirps. Then a staticky voice says through the speaker, "Unit 77, please respond. Over." James says, "Please excuse me for a moment." Francine nods and James turns and starts walking back towards his car, talking into the radio. "This is Unit 77, dispatch. Over." Francine looks back at the car to resume examining the ash pile. But as she does, she detects motion in her peripheral vision. When she looks up, she sees someone walking towards her, slowly, just beyond the tree line. The person is wearing a state trooper uniform, like James. As the person comes closer, she sees that it looks exactly like James. They make eye contact, then he disappears behind a tree, out of sight. "Detective Monroe?" says James' voice behind her. Francine jumps, startled, then turns around. James is standing there, looking at her quizzically. "Are you all right?" he says. Francine furrows her brow as she looks at him, then glances back in the other direction, towards the tree line. Seeing no one there, she nods rapidly. Yes, I'm fine." "I just got another call, and I need to leave," James says. "The police forensic team should be here soon. Are you going to be all right until they get here?" Francine feels a flare of irritation as she regains her composure. It's as if he's implying that she can't take care of herself because she's a woman and needs a man to look after her. With a look that's somewhere between a smirk and a scowl, she pulls back her trench coat to reveal the service pistol clipped to her belt. "Yeah, I think I'll be all right," she says. James nods and turns around to leave. As he walks away, Francine leads him to the car and pulls the keys out of the ignition. Francine pulls the screen door open as its rusty hinges creak in protest. She stands upon the front porch of a small, tidy house. Shadows play about the home's facade from nearby trees, swaying in the cool wind. She balls her fists and pounds upon the door. "Mrs. Gomez?" she says. "This is the police. Please open up." She stands there, listening to the baleful wind blow, looking around as she awaits a response. The working-class neighborhood consists of small houses lined up in neat rows. A parked car sits in the driveway across the street. There's a pile of old toys in the next yard over. No one's around, despite the obvious signs of human inhabitation. After about 30 seconds, Francine pounds on the door again and says, "It's the police. I have a search warrant." She waits another 10 seconds, then pulls the keys from the car out of her pocket. She tries the one that looks the most like a house key, sliding it into the lock. It glides right in and turns easily. The deadbolt disengages with a click. She turns the doorknob and opens the door, then steps inside. Francine finds herself in a darkened living room. The musty air smells like ancient cigarette smoke, mixed with chemical disinfectant. The shades are drawn, the midday sunlight glowing faintly around their edges. "This is Detective Francine Monroe," she says in a commanding voice. "I have a search warrant to search the premises. If anyone is present, they must make themselves known immediately." Silence. The floorboards creak beneath Francine's feet as she walks across the floor, scanning the room. An overstuffed sofa sits against the wall next to a coffee table. On the other side is an entertainment center with a television mounted to the wall above it. At the far end is a fireplace with a simple wooden mantel. Upon the mantel sit several pictures. She goes over to get a closer look at them. In the first one, she recognizes a younger and very much alive Freddie Gomez. Sitting across from him at a table is a pretty petite woman who's noticeably younger than he. Between them is a smiling little girl with a birthday cake in front of her. The cake has a candle on it shaped like the number 6. They must be Alice and Margaret, Francine says to herself. She notices that Alice has a silver locket hanging from a chain around her neck. They're all smiling, except Alice's smile doesn't reach her eyes. A wave of emotion washes over Francine as she recalls her own daughter's 6th birthday. "Oh, Mark, Esther," she says, whispering, "I miss you so much." Her lower lip quivers, and she realizes she's about to start crying. Stopping herself, she takes a deep breath, dons an emotionless expression, and continues her investigation. The rest of the pictures are all of the family as well. They look older and older, and each one progressing from left to right. Alice's fake smile fades from one image to the next. In the last photo, she's not smiling at all, but is frowning instead. Francine notices that Alice is wearing the same silver locket in every picture. Walking down the hall and into the bathroom, Francine turns the light on and looks into the mirror. Her hair is disheveled, and large purple bags hang beneath her eyes. With a deep sigh, she opens the medicine cabinet behind the mirror. Inside, she spies some prescription pill bottles, along with a tube of toothpaste, a couple of deodorant sticks, and a box of floss. She picks up the pill bottles and examines their labels. There's a mood stabilizer, an antidepressant, and also an antipsychotic. Francine looks closely at the labels. She sees that each of the fill dates are all several months old, yet the bottles are nearly full. She puts them back inside the cabinet with a puzzled look and closes the door. As she does, she hears what sounds like creaking footsteps out in the hallway. Holding completely still, she listens for several moments. "Hello?" she says. "This is the police. I have a warrant to search this property. Is anyone home?" Silence. The air seems to become mustier, making it hard for Francine to breathe. She sucks in a deep breath as she creeps down the hallway and peeks into the living room. No one's there. The whole house groans and creaks as a strong wind blows outside. She continues down the hallway toward a wooden door, then turns the doorknob and pulls. The door is heavy and makes a sucking, whooshing noise as it opens into a pitch-black space. A wall of cold air that smells like rotting metal hits her in the face. She gags, fumbling her hand around on the wall next to the doorway in search of a light switch. Finding one, she flips it on. A fluorescent light bulb overhead buzzes to life, bathing the room in white incandescence. She sees that she's inside the garage. A drain sits in the middle of the concrete floor. There's a sedan on one side with an empty space beside it. A pool of congealed blood lies next to the car's front wheels, flowing into the drain. 2 heel-sized drag marks extend out from the pool towards the empty space and then disappear. Francine reaches for her holster and draws her weapon, pointing it at the floor as she grips the handle with both hands. Slowly, She walks down the short flight of wooden steps leading to the floor. She takes long, deep breaths through her nose to stay calm, despite the putrid smell of decaying blood. She concentrates on the sensory input all around her, collecting as much information in her mind as she can. Something shiny catches her eye as she approaches the drain. Bending down at her knees, she sees an object glimmering inside it. She pushes her fingers through the holes in the grate and is just barely able to grasp the object with her fingertips. She pulls it out and gasps at what she sees. It's a gold ring, slightly scuffed and worn around the edges. It's remarkably shiny and clean, even though it was at the bottom of the bloody drain. "No, it can't be," Francine says, her eyes welling up with tears. Her fingers trembling, she turns it around to examine the inner lining. There, engraved in looping cursive letters, exactly like how she remembers, are the words, "I'll always love you, Francine. Mark." Her heart sinks. Francine's hands start trembling, and she accidentally drops the ring. It bounces off the edge of the grate and falls back down into the drain. "No," she says. She shoves her fingers through the holes once more, wriggling them around. Feeling nothing, she sticks her face up next to the grate, peering down into the darkness. But she sees nothing. After several minutes of trying to recover the ring in vain, she gives up. She stands, looking at her blood-covered fingers as she holds her hands out in front of her, and bursts into tears. Just then she heard, "Francine! Francine! Francine! Wake up!" With a snap of a finger, she opened her eyes. There she sat, in a fluorescent-lit room, sitting across the table from a man in a white coat and clipboard in front of him. He oddly looked like the dead man in the back seat, Freddie. Next to him in the corner stood a man in all white. As he walked toward them, leaving the shadows, she realized she had seen this man before. It was James, the state trooper, she thought. "Dr. Frederick, do you need anything else tonight?" "No, that'll be all, James. Good night." Francine tried to raise her hand from the wooden arm of the chair, but couldn't. She slowly glanced down and saw she was restrained. Panic set in. "What the fuck is this? Take these restraints off of me. I'm a police officer, goddammit." "Mrs. Monroe, please. Please. Control yourself, or I'll have to give you a sedative. You're safe. You're right here at Crestview Hospital, and everything's fine." "What the hell are you talking about? I'm a detective. Why am I here, and who the fuck are you?" "Miss Monroe. Miss Monroe. How many times must we go over this? My name is Dr. Frederick Gomez. I've been your attending physician for the past 3 months now. And no, you are no longer a police detective. You're simply Francine Monroe. You stopped being a detective the moment you murdered your entire family." "Bullshit! I didn't murder anyone. I was in the middle of trying to solve—" "Let me stop you right there, Miss Monroe. I've heard this before, many times as a matter of fact. I know this by heart. Let me see. You've just happened upon what looks like to be an accident. A state trooper greets you by the name of James Magnuson. You see a man sitting in the back seat with 3 bullet holes to his head by the name of Frederico Gomez. There's ashes in the passenger seat and no sign of the man's wife or daughter, correct?" How did you know that?" Like I've said before, Miss Monroe, we've gone over this over and over for months now. That's why I had to snap you out of your hypnosis again. You still don't remember. There is no case. There is no accident. There is no Freddie, no Margaret, and no Alice. These are all things you've come up with in your mind to block the horrific crime you committed more than 3 months ago. What crime? What the hell are you talking about? Think, Miss Monroe, think. You were found by the side of the road, unconscious, lying on the ground. Your car was 20 feet away, crashed into a tree. There was a fire. Your husband, Mark's body, was found a few yards in front of the vehicle. Now, even though your husband was already dead from bullet wounds he received by you, your young daughter, Esther, was still alive. Sadly, she was trapped and unconscious and burned to death in the passenger seat. All that was left were her ashes. Later at your home, they found blood in you and your husband's bed, where you had murdered him. They even found your bloodied wedding ring in the drain downstairs. You keep putting these little subliminal messages in your story, Miss Monroe, of the truth, the wedding ring, the ashes, but you still refuse to accept what you did completely. Everything else, a lie. Everyone else, just people you've interacted with here at the hospital, wrapped into your delusion. We must break through, Miss Monroe. You must accept what you have done. But I'm a detective. I'm a detective. I'm a detective. Miss Monroe, that's enough now. I'm a detective. I'm a detective. All right, that's enough for the day. Nurse Margaret, Nurse Alice, will you please escort Miss Monroe back to her room, please? Maybe we'll try again tomorrow. The Lurker in the Night. The killer struck for the first time a year ago. I remember it clearly. It was all over the newspapers. The pretty blonde smoking her cigarette outside the old cinema didn't see it coming. She never stood a chance. All anyone heard was a piercing shriek, and that's it. She was probably dead before she hit the ground. No one saw the guy either. He disappeared into the rainy night like a phantom. I mean, literally, he was gone in seconds. I always wonder if she screamed from pain or terror. Everyone cowered around her body afterwards, shedding tears in the downpour as the cops questioned them. So it was a few hours before some unlucky usher went inside again and made the gruesome find that the golden-haired beauty out front wasn't the evening's first victim. He was in the theater, sitting behind an aging socialite out by herself. A raucous screwball comedy was showing, so no one heard her screams over their laughter. They were all too busy having a good time. The authorities were stumped. They didn't want to admit it, but how the guy got in and out like that without so much as attracting a shred of attention baffled them. I think it frightened them too. A famous shrink they consulted said that he likely didn't run off that night, but hid close by in the shadows, maybe even blending in with the crowd, watching the mayhem he created unfold around him, giddy with delight, while savoring his handiwork. This got everyone excited, naturally. Mothers wouldn't let their kids play outside after dark, and women refused to walk alone at night. Some even started carrying a piece on them. I wasn't scared, though. Stuff like this is bound to happen once in a while. In a big city, it's inevitable. I didn't exactly fit the killer's desired type, either. After a few weeks, things started to go back to normal. But just as people were starting to forget, the freshly healed wound on our city was ripped back open. Someone blew the mayor's brains out while he was having a nap outside in his hammock at lunch. His bodyguards tried to catch the guy, but he was fast. They chased peals of maniacal laughter into the open woods behind City Hall until both of them were shot. Only one survived. He was in the hospital for months after his amputation. The cops and reporters hounded the poor guy relentlessly. After all, he was the only one who'd seen the killer's face. He couldn't give them anything useful, no matter how much the sketch artist prodded at his memory, or how often the hypnotist dangled his gold pocket watch in front of his face. The only thing he kept saying, over and over, was that it was the most horrible face he'd ever seen in his life. This scared people. I mean, really scared them. I saw the grim fear etched into their faces as I strode through the shadows and secret alleys of the city. Still, I was unfazed. I knew how to keep well hidden. The killer couldn't find me. They ramped up security all around the fat cat politicians and businessmen in town. You should have seen it. They wouldn't go anywhere without their hired beefcakes. Little old men in expensive suits, not realizing that they were showing the world just how impotent they were. Hell, I even eavesdropped on a few whispered conversations in quiet rooms, the kind where people bare their souls when they're all alone with someone they trust. They all said, maybe it wouldn't be so bad if the killer took out a few more of them. But I think he heard them from far off. He strangled a homeless man to death, a poor unloved fellow who couldn't afford any protection. It must have been horrible for him. When they found his body, it was covered in honey, with giant red ants and maggots in every nook and orifice, feeding. His face was petrified into an expression of almost preternatural terror. People stopped going outside completely after that. The city was a tomb. I would know. I was the only one walking the streets anymore. My footsteps echoed off the darkened houses with drawn curtains and empty office buildings and shops as I looked in vain for any companionship. I even started dressing differently in an effort to draw him out. By this point, I'd have given anything to catch a glimpse of this fiend from hell. But that was a bad idea. I probably should have followed their advice. I probably should have locked my doors. I probably should have closed my windows, or at least gotten a dog. You see, I lived by myself, on a lonely dirt road in the woods. I remember lying in bed, sleepless, on that steamy summer night, with the full moon shining into my room from deep space. Ancient people thought the moon drove you mad. I remember the gentle tinkling of the wind chimes on my porch, stopping as he approached. I remember screaming as he smashed through my window with his bare hands, clearing away broken glass without so much as a scratch, and then climbing into my bedroom, effortlessly, his lean, sinewy frame contorting in a way no man possibly can. He looked just as I'd always imagined, like a living nightmare. "Why do you kill?" I screamed hoarsely, thrashing in my sheets as he seemed to float through the air towards me, the raised butcher knife in his gnarled right hand, glistening silver in the moonlight. Why me?" He halted next to me, blackening out the moonlight completely, his pockmarked, sickly green face crinkled like paper as a demented grin spread across his black lips. He leered down at me, his yellow eyes glowing with a frenzied insanity that betrayed no trace of human warmth behind them. "Everyone always asks that. Everyone looks for a reason. Can't you see? It's what I'm made for." He might have cackled after that. I don't know. He brought down the heavy butcher knife, and the blackness swallowed me. For good.